So a couple of things. First, while we are, as we have been encouraged to do so far this morning, praying for the West Coast because of its secularism, may I say, as a son of the South, a place that claims to be quite churched, a place that claims to be filled with people who believe in a God of justice and mercy, that maybe we need to say some prayers for my people, because it's not just the secular West Coast, you see. A lot of Christians owned other human beings, or at least claimed to be so. A lot of folks who went to church multiple times a week defended segregation. So you can be a churched geography. You can be a place where a lot of folks say hosannas and fall to their knees and show up on Sunday and claim to love God, but hate their brother who they see every day. And so let us not pretend, please, today, and I feel I had to say this as a matter of moral and ethical obligation, to believe that the problem in this country and in this world is just those areas that seem to be more secular, because there are plenty of folks in incredibly religious areas who are damaging this country and have damaged this country and violated its principles from the beginning. So if you want to pray, pray for everybody to get it right. Not just some folk who live on the West Coast. Now, the topic I was given today was to talk about fostering positive race relations. And I have to tell you that in order to do that as some longer-term goal, we have to start by understanding what it is that has been fostering the opposite of that. What is it that has been fostering racism, bias, prejudice, etc.? And to be honest with you, as somebody who's been doing this work for 3 decades, I can tell you, and anyone in this room who's thought about and lived the experience of racism in this country, certainly folks of color who know it far better than myself, will tell you that we rarely examine that question. We rarely actually ask the question fully. What is it that is fostering the opposite of positive race relations? What is it that is fostering racism, bias, and prejudice? Or maybe we do ask it, but we give very simplistic and simple and easy to digest answers that don't really get us where we need to go. So we say, well, it's just evil, or well, it's just sin, or well, it's just bad people. But then that allows us to get distance from it and to act like, well, it's those people over there. It's those boys marching in Charlottesville with their tiki torches, those neo-Nazis last year. Thank God I'm not them. See, and then we get distance, right? And we act like it's not our problem. It's just neo-Nazis. It's David Duke. It's white supremacists. But now, David Duke is not to blame for the fact that right now the typical white family in America has 15 times the net worth of the typical black family. The Klan didn't do that, y'all. Those boys in Charlottesville are not to blame for the fact that black folks unarmed, posing no threat to police, are 3.5 times more likely to be shot by police. That's not the Klan, y'all. That's not neo-Nazis. It's not David Duke, right? So the disparities that we live with in this country, we can't put that on just bad people doing bad things. We can't limit that to the notion of individual sin or evil. We have to look at the structural things that are going on. Many years ago, there was an organization, used to have a slogan. They tried to explain how racism happens, and it was the National Conference of Christians and Jews. You may remember this organization. They later transitioned into the National Council on Community and Justice, I think is what they renamed themselves. They used to have a slogan. The slogan was, you have to be taught how to hate. Now, for those of you who are musical theater fans, you know that was a ripoff of a line from the musical South Pacific, but anyway, it's all right. Plagiarism in the interest of justice, it's okay. You have to be taught how to hate. That was their slogan. The problem with that was, I always found that to be too simplistic, right? Because it creates this image of like a parent, let's say, sitting their kid down and saying, you should hate these people, or you should hate these people, teaching racism blatantly and overtly. And I mean, that happens. Don't get me wrong, that happens, right? But I want to suggest to you that sometimes we get taught in indirect ways. Not just because somebody sits us down at their knee and teaches us stuff that is wrong and hurtful, but because we ingest it in the society where we live, even when it might not be deliberate. The problem is so much bigger and deeper than being taught hatred. The problem indeed is so much bigger and deeper than hatred. We're not just being taught racism by our parents and by family. How we view each other and how we treat each other is determined by how we experience each other within the social structures that we share. What do I mean by that? I want to suggest to you something that's going to be very hard for some of you to digest, but I need for you to struggle with it and sit with it and think about it, however difficult it is to hear. Racism in this country is inculcated not just by bad people, it is inculcated by some of the core fundamental principles of this country. It is not an aberration. I know we like to think of it as such because we have this rhetoric, right? This beautiful rhetoric that Thomas Jefferson, who I gather is one of white folks' favorite white folks, but not necessarily mine, but some other white folks seem to like him a lot. Thomas Jefferson said all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, let's not forget that when he wrote that, he owned 237 human beings, so he obviously didn't mean it. But he said it, and we like, some of us, particularly white folks, we really like to sit in that. We really like to believe that that's the country that we live in. But it's not. And it's never been the country that we actually live in. And if we can't tell the truth, see, we can't foster positive relations on the back of a lie. The truth will set you free. Not half-truth, not deception, not talking about gonna make America great again like it was ever great for millions of people in this country for whom it never was. See, you can't foster positive relations on the back of a lie. So we're either going to tell the truth and be uncomfortable with it, or we're just going to keep playing games and kicking this down the road to our children and our grandchildren. And I'm tired of games. And I know people of color are tired of games, so let's just do the work. Because see, in this country, the reason that we end up ingesting notions of white superiority and black and brown folks' inferiority, it's not because the Klan taught us. It's not because David Duke taught us. It's not because of some neo-Nazis in Charlottesville last year. It's because we grow up in a society of such profound inequality, and we have a mentality that rationalizes it. What do I mean? Think about what's the one thing that we all were taught in this country. I don't care what your religious background is, your geographic background, your political beliefs. I don't care any of that. The one thing we all got taught, because it is the secular gospel of this country. It is Genesis 1:1 of the Bible of Americanism. What is it? It's the idea that you can be anything you want in America if you just work hard. By God, if you want it, you can get it. You can be anything you want to be if you're just willing to work hard for it. That sounds real nice, doesn't it? Sounds very pretty. And we know it's not true, really, because we know plenty of people. Every one of us knows people who've worked hard their whole lives and have nothing to show for it. And we also know some folks born on third base think they hit a triple, never actually had to do much work at all. Am I right? So we know it's really not that simple, but we like that ideology because we think that gives our children incentives. If you tell them they can be anything, they'll work hard. Here's what it also does. If I tell you that where you end up is all about you, and then I look around, and what do I see? I see rich folk, and I see poor folk. And I see white folks disproportionately, not exclusively, but disproportionately up here and people of color down here. And I see men disproportionately here and women here. Now I start to rationalize that, don't I? Because I was told wherever I end up is on me. I can be anything that I want to be because rugged individualism. First of all, as a side note, if you don't learn anything else from today from me, that'd be a shame. But if you don't learn anything else, please write this down. There's no such thing as a rugged individual. In fact, there's no such thing as an individual human being abstracted from their social context. Humans are social creatures. None of us were raised on an island by a porpoise, y'all. Right? And if you ever do run into somebody who actually is a rugged individual, you need to get away from that thing. It is going to be dangerous, man. Feral. It's not going to have language. It's not going to know that whole thing about not eating you because nobody would have taught it. You need to run, right? There's no, anybody that says, I made it all on my own, I came from nothing and I'm a self-made. Nobody's self-made. You had parents, you had family, you had community, you had teachers, right? You had friends, you had mentors, people that came into your life. But we have that mentality because people who've made it want to act like they did it all on their own and want to look down at the people who haven't. But see, that's the problem. If you tell folks where you end up is all about you, and then they look around and see inequality, they say what? Rich folks just must be superior. And that's why they're rich. Poor folks must be inferior, and that's why they're poor. If you believe that, you will never fight a system of economic inequality. You will allow it, you will rationalize it, and you will maintain it. And you are of no use to this movement. If you decide that where you end up is all about you, and you look around and see white folk here and people of color here, you rationalize white superiority. Right? And I was thinking about this not as a scholar and an activist, but as a dad. I got two daughters, 17 and 15, so I know there are some folks in here who pray, so y'all feel free to send one up for me, just on the basis of being a dad of two teenage daughters. Several years back, when they were 12 and 10, we were driving one day, they're dancers, and we were driving from school to the dance studio where they were both in the dance company at the time. And it's a drive we make every day, and this particular day we're driving through a community, public housing community that's halfway between the school and the dance studio. And we've made this drive every day, but on this particular day, we get stopped at the red light. My daughter, 10-year-old Rachel, in the back seat, looks around and says, "Daddy, why is this neighborhood pretty much all black?" And I thought, well, now that is a really good question. I was impressed. I'm like, my 10-year-old is doing urban anthropology in the back of my Highlander. That's good stuff for a 10-year-old, right? And I was excited because as a dad, y'all who are parents, you know that sometimes your kids will ask you questions, you don't have any clue what the answer is, right? So like if my kid had said, "Where does electricity come from?" I would have been like, "Aren't y'all studying that? Like, you got a phone, Google it," right? But she asked me the one question I actually know the answer to. You asked me about the racial dynamic of a neighborhood, Daddy actually knows that. That's what Daddy knows. So I was excited. I was about to bust out all this knowledge in front of my children. You got to take your victories where you can get them when you have kids. So I was like, okay, I'm ready. I got the answer right here. I was ready to impress. I knew I only had 3 minutes, so I couldn't give her the PhD version. A, she was 10, and B, I didn't have time, but I could give her and the 12-year-old sitting next to me the 3-minute version. I'm ready to do it. Then something happened I didn't know was going to happen because I'm an only child. I didn't know this, but apparently when a younger child asks a question of the parent in the presence of the older sibling will inevitably answer their own question just to impress the parent. They will try to show out. And so I'm ready with the answer. Remember the question, Rachel says, "Why is this neighborhood pretty much all black?" The 12-year-old Ashton says, "Redlining." I was like, what? It's like, how do you know that? Do you just know things? Did your mother give birth to a sociological savant? What was that? How does a 12-year-old know? And now, honestly, if y'all know the term redlining, you know this is something banks did for generations. Legally, it was legal until 1968. They would just take red markers and mark around the contours of black communities. Anybody that lived within the red line wasn't getting a loan. Didn't matter what their credit was. Didn't matter if they were educated. Didn't matter what their income was. They were locked out of capital. Now, to be honest, I don't want to be too critical of my 12-year-old because she was 12. Redlining's not exactly how the neighborhood got black, but it is how it got poor. That's how it was starved of capital. How it got black, very interesting story. Public housing, most folks don't know this, but I explained it to my kids on the ride to the dance studio. Public housing wasn't created for black folks. Public housing was created for white folks. In fact, black folks were excluded from it for the first several years of its existence. It was created to help poor white people, but at the same time, the government created what? The FHA loan program, the VA loan program, also things that were off limits for about 30 years, in effect, to black and brown folks. So at the very same time that white folks were getting public housing, they were also getting an avenue out of the hood. They were getting an avenue out of the city, into the suburbs, where only we could live. And so the government underwrote these loans. The government subsidized these loans. The government guaranteed and created the white middle class. That's how we got out of the cities, and then who was left behind? The black and brown folk who were not allowed to get capital because of redlining. So I dropped my kids off. I asked them, did that history make sense? They said it did. I felt very good about myself having explained in just a few minutes to my 10 and 12-year-old the racial and class dynamics of the community that they drive through every day. Right? But then as I pulled away, I was horrified by a thought. I thought to myself, what happens if I don't know the answer to that question? Because I would gather millions of white parents in particular don't. See, black and brown folks sort of know the story I just told because they lived it. Right? So it's not real shocking to them. But to white folks, when you ask that question, how did it, they didn't teach us that. I took AP history, y'all. That's the history for the smart people. That's what they tell you. They still didn't teach us that. I had to learn that after. So if I don't know the answer and my kid asks me, and I don't know, the context, the history of oppression and inequality, do you think my kid stops wondering? No, she's going to keep wondering, but she's going to answer her own question the only way she knows how, by going back to what the culture taught her, which was what? Remember, wherever you end up is all about you, so if you didn't make it, it's your own fault. You should have worked harder, which means that she will come to rationalize racial inequity. She will come to rationalize economic inequity. She will come to rationalize the gender-based inequity that will marginalize her as a woman on this planet. She will come to internalize all of that, and then we act shocked that we have a racism problem. We act shocked that folks are walking around with these beliefs and these prejudices. There's nothing shocking about it. It's rather shocking when we don't have them. Because everything in the system, everything in the society has led us in that direction. If you are standing at the end of a sausage factory and you're surprised that it keeps giving you sausage, you probably need to pay closer attention. If you're at the end of the sausage factory conveyor belt and you're like, where are my chicken nuggets at? You clearly did not read the sign, fool, on the outside of the building. Sausage is what it does. Don't be surprised. When this society turns out this mentality by virtue of not addressing the inequality, we can't be surprised when white folks internalize superiority and when black and brown folks internalize inferiority and oppression. You don't understand that concept. People want to talk about violence in black and brown communities like it's not connected to that. Right? Malcolm X is the one who said to black folks, who taught you to hate yourself? Right? We better ask that question, right? This idea that violence in black and brown space is not connected to white supremacy. See, but the system tells us it's not. The system says, well, that's just you. You're a bad person. Wherever you end up, including jail, must all be because of you. We don't connect the dots, right, between a society that teaches black folks to hate black bodies, right, and take it out on one another. Right? And we do damage even in our schools. I train teachers a lot, and I talk to teachers, and sometimes well-meaning teachers, white and of color, by the way, will tell black children and Latino children that they need to study and stay in school and get an education. Why? So they can get out of this neighborhood, so they can get out of here, so they can escape. Now, I know the people who say that, maybe they mean well, but do you hear what that says? Like, listen carefully. If I tell you the purpose of getting an education is so you can escape, I am telling you that everything you come from, everything you are, everybody who ever knew you and loved you is broken. I am putting a curse on you and suggesting that you need to be fixed. My friends, it is not the oppressed who need to be fixed. It is not the marginalized who need to be fixed. It is not those at the bottom who need to be fixed. It is the system that needs to be transformed. That is my job. That is your job. And I appreciate you very much. Thank you.